So what do you do when you're put in charge of a 2,000-year-old institution that looks like it's about to crumble? Do you just double down on the old ways, or do you try to forge a completely new path? Well, that was the exact dilemma facing Gioacchino Pecci back in 1878 when he became Pope Leo XIII, the man who would take one of the world's oldest institutions and drag it kicking and screaming right into the modern age.
To really get Leo XIII, you first have to understand the absolute mess he inherited. In 1878, the Catholic Church wasn't just, facing a few problems. It was under siege from every direction, politically, economically, intellectually. The big question on everyone's mind was whether the papacy could even remain relevant.
I mean, look at this timeline. It was a perfect storm. First off, the Pope had lost all of his land and power. The Papal States were just gone, swallowed up by the new unified Italy. This left him as a self-declared prisoner in the Vatican. Then you've got Germany's chancellor, the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, waging a full-on cultural struggle, the Kulturkampf, basically designed to crush Catholic influence. And simmering under all of that, the Industrial Revolution is creating this enormous, desperate working class that the Church just had no answers for. So naturally, they started listening to radical new ideas like socialism.
And this quote from Bismarck, it just says it all. This really captures the attitude Leo was up against. This wasn't just politics for Bismarck. He saw the fight between the state and the church as this ancient, 1,000-year-old quarrel. He was basically laughing at the idea that diplomacy could ever work. To him, the church was a foreign enemy that needed to be brought to heel.
So, staring down this wall of pure hostility, what's Leo's move? He does the last thing anyone expected. His predecessor, Pius IX, was famous for basically condemning the entire modern world. But Leo? He chose a totally different path. Engagement. He was a brilliant intellectual, a skilled diplomat, and he decided to actually use those talents.
And you know what? It worked. He played his cards perfectly and managed to end Bismarck's Kulturkampf in Germany. Not by fighting, but by being a savvy negotiator who found common ground, ironically, in fighting socialism. He smoothed things over with countries like Russia and Great Britain. And in France, where things were incredibly tense, he made a really pragmatic call, telling French Catholics to rally to the new government. Bit by bit, through this patient, smart diplomacy, Leo started to rebuild the papacy's reputation in the world.
But patching things up with governments was only half the battle. The much bigger and honestly more explosive issue was the social question: what to do about the millions of poor workers being crushed by the Industrial Revolution. And this is where Leo would leave his most lasting legacy.
In 1891, he dropped a bombshell, an encyclical called Rerum Novarum. In Latin, that means of new things. And what a perfect title! For the very first time, the Church officially and systematically took on the realities of modern industrial life. This one document would become the cornerstone for everything we now call Catholic social teaching.
What he proposed was, frankly, radical. He looked at the two big ideas of his day and rejected both of them. If you look at this chart, you can see he slammed laissez-faire capitalism for its cruelty, but he also slammed socialism's solution, abolishing private property, as just making things worse. Instead, he carved out this third way. He said, yes, people have a right to private property, but it comes with a duty to use it for the common good. And yes, the state should get involved, not to control everything, but to protect the weak and ensure justice.
And the details were just revolutionary for the 1890s. He argued that workers had a right to a living wage, not just enough to stay alive, but enough to actually support a family with dignity. He fiercely defended their right to form trade unions. He condemned child labor. He insisted that the state had a moral duty to protect its most vulnerable people. It's really no surprise he got the nickname the Pope of the Workers.
Okay, but for all his serious intellectual work, Leo was still a man of his time, which leads to this wild little fact. He was a big fan of a tonic called Vin Mariani, which was basically red wine infused with coca leaves, the source of cocaine. Apparently, he loved this stuff so much that he gave its creator a gold medal from the Vatican and even showed up on a poster endorsing it. It's a strange little detail that definitely makes him seem a bit more human.
All right, so beyond the politics and the social justice, Leo also took on the other great challenge of the 19th century, this idea that faith and modern science were at war with each other. And his strategy wasn't to hide or build walls, it was to re-engage with the modern mind on its own terms.
And he had a clear three-step plan. First, he revived the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas, Thomism, because he believed its clear logic was the perfect toolkit for talking with modern thinkers.
Second, in a huge show of confidence, he threw open the doors to the Vatican's secret archives in 1881, basically saying, "Go ahead, look, the truth will only help us." And third, he refounded the Vatican Observatory, a giant, symbolic statement that the Church was not afraid of science.
And his own words about the observatory just nail it. He wanted to make it crystal clear that the Church and science weren't enemies. He said the Church should embrace, encourage, and promote true and solid science, because truth is truth, whether you find it through a telescope or through faith. But for all his focus on intellect and reason, Leo also had this deep, mystical side, which comes out in this one really dramatic story. The account goes that on October 13th, 1884, right after Mass, he just froze, staring into space for about 10 minutes. He later said he had this horrifying vision of demons gathering over Rome to attack the Church. He was so shaken that he walked straight to his office, wrote the famous prayer to Saint Michael the Archangel, and ordered it to be said after every single Mass around the world.
So when you pull all of this together, the diplomat, the social reformer, the intellectual, the spiritual leader, what you get is this amazing, comprehensive response to the modern world. You get the legacy of the very first modern pope.
He was on the throne for 25 years, a quarter of a century. That long reign gave him the time he needed to really see his vision through, guiding the Church right over the threshold from the 19th into the 20th century and really setting the stage for everything that came after.
So what's the final takeaway? His legacy is that he didn't just solve a few problems. He completely redefined what the papacy was for a new age. He gave the Church a social conscience, a voice in world affairs, a bridge to science, and a deeper spiritual life, especially with his focus on the Rosary. He proved that the papacy could be a major moral and intellectual force, even without an army or a kingdom.
And that really brings us to the big question his life leaves us with. A question that's just as relevant now as it was in 1878. How can any ancient institution, one that's built on tradition and what it sees as timeless truths, change and adapt to a crazy, fast-moving world without losing its very soul? The papacy of Leo XIII offers one really powerful and fascinating answer to that question.